Hello, and thank you for listening to this Resilience and Thriving webinar. My name is Julia Wilkins from the Health Management Department at Health New England. During this webinar, we will learn from the work and research done by Dr. Joel Bennett at the Organizational Wellness and Learning Systems and talk about how we can meet stress head-on and actually learn from it and turn it into growth. Let me ask you a question. What do you think the 3 stages of dealing with stress are? Any ideas? They are coping, resilience, and thriving. Thriving is improving to an enlivened state of being or vitality that is better than before the stress occurred. We always hear about resilience, but resilience is actually the ability to bounce back and learn from stress. And coping is the ability to adapt or just get past the stressful events. What you see here are the 6 dimensions of wellness according to the National Wellness Institute. And as you see in this legend, we've mapped out coping, resilience, and thriving into the hexagon. The darkest green sections contain words and ideas that you might associate with coping in each of these sections. Moving outward, there are words more associated with resilience and then ultimately thriving. We should strive for the words in the lightest green sections. But recognize that in life, we may flow from dark green to light green and back again as we are always ever changing. The goal is not to avoid stress, but to learn from it and get to that state of thriving. In our personal life and at work, we relate to stress at different levels, from being always distressed to actually thriving on stress. Our set point is like our baseline or return point. Our baseline for expected happiness or a return point after positive or negative experiences. So this is like a thermostat, and we adjust ourselves and our expectations. This works for both positive and negative experiences, and we're all different, as you know, if you have coworkers or family members who are different from you. Some of us get used to or develop the habit of always being distressed or just releasing tension. Even if positive experiences happen, we will always return to that set level. Others come to expect more from life, so we act to make that happen. And if bad things happen, we are resilient, and again, we cope effectively, maybe even thrive, and then return back to that set point. Individuals, groups, organizations, families, they all have a set point for well-being, joy, and thriving, as well as for disease and pain and distress. And we all have a point that we are willing to tolerate. Even after experiencing negative events, we can return to the level that we're used to. And after we experience positive events, we can return to that same set point. So ultimately, the set point can place an upper limit on our experience. So the point is to raise your set point so that you're returning to a higher point than you used to. You'll want to raise your awareness so that you choose a higher upper limit. So in order to figure out what your current set point is, you got to ask yourself a few questions. So ask yourself, what do you settle for on a daily basis, or what do you tolerate? Are you just getting by? And how can you thrive? We each have that innate or inborn capacity to cope with stress. And as human beings, we're actually hardwired to know how to deal with difficult situations. Because we have this ability, we can always raise our set point. I want you to remember that. We may have heard the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and this means that adversity can actually be our friend. We can grow from negative experiences or trauma. We're not just coping or getting by, we can actually get stronger. So let's talk a little bit more about stress and understand what stress is. So stress can occur with one single stressful event or many events piled on top of each other. And another word for that is chronic stress. We know there's different ways that the workplace can be stressful. These can include the following: change, which is like having a sudden or marked change in how work is done. If there's a turnover rate, changes in your supervisor, administration, policies, anything like that. There's also conflict. So you have a lot of different personalities working together, and this can cause stress if we don't handle conflict or those personalities well, or we try to resist it. There also can be work overload, so having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And then communication, so people in general are just not communicating well with each other. And if we think about it, I'm sure many of us have had a single or even multiple of these events occur in just the last week. And so the key is how you respond and the resources you bring to that stress or problem. So what can you do in the face of overload, change, conflict, or communication? Well, a healthy lifestyle is one type of resource that protects us from stress, that helps us stay ready for it, so that when it comes, it gives us the capacity to see it as an opportunity. We're strong enough to do that. Health, support, mindfulness, and rest are 4 positive lifestyle areas. You and everyone in your family or work team bring their own resources and strengths to the table. You all have different strengths and resources. No one is the same, and each of us has our own response style, which can include problem-solving skills, social support, hardiness, and avoidance. So avoidance is kind of a trick one. You might think that that's not an effective way to deal with stress, and most of the time it's not. But sometimes, and you have to recognize when this is, it's the best and the only answer in that moment. So we know when stress is becoming a problem in our life when we have some early warning signs. These might be physical, emotional, social, spiritual, or cognitive. And some of these examples include headaches, exhaustion, stomach issues, anxiety, anger, frustration, lack of meaning in life, a feeling of emptiness. You might feel lonely or grouchy, very impulsive, or just a lack of concentration on anything. So when we recognize and identify these symptoms in ourselves, this here is the opportunity, this is the chance to manage them and to get help. So whether it's through your employer's EAP, counseling, therapy, anything like that, this is the chance to make a difference without then getting into those long-term effects, which we'll talk about. Work and life and a lot of things are impacted if you fail to buffer these symptoms. So think of the list that I just said. Imagine a life affected by all of those and how that would impact your personal life and your work life. So if you ignore these symptoms, you can have a lot of problems. For example, a decreased job involvement, becoming less cooperative, less conscientious, and most importantly, burning out or even withdrawal and depression. So when you start to experience these early warning signs, pay attention. Now we'll talk about and address the symptoms and stressors in the positive coping cycle. So when we have a stress and we apply the positive coping cycle, it will have 3 steps. First, you're going to have the stressor. Then you're going to evaluate the situation. And then lastly, you'll choose a healthy way to cope with that stress. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, let's break this down a little bit. So when you have that stress, you really want to look at the stress situation in the reality component and the reaction component. So as part of the reality, it's a helpful skill to just label what happened, and that's like the black and white of it. You don't want to look at the situation with interpretations, added thoughts, or feelings. You just want to look at what happened. For example, if you're in a car accident or you witness a car accident, you could say A hit B. That would be the reality and the black and white of the situation. Now there's a reaction, and note that the reaction component involves our own internal thoughts and feelings. This is where you judge, your emotions come in. Relating it to the car accident, you could think that the person who you're in the car accident with is a bad driver, they should never have their license. I just bought this car, it's brand new. A lot of additional thoughts come into that stressor, and see how much that reaction elevates the stress of the reality. The second part is to evaluate. So when that stress comes into your life, you have 2 subcomponents. You can pause, just stopping, relaxing, breathing, waiting, just taking that pause, breathe and stop, and then assessing or examining the situation. So this means You want to take a step back, again, looking at the simple black and white of the situation, being objective as possible, and then reviewing your values. So this is something that is important to you. Your values might be different than someone else's. So what is important to you? What action should you take that would support your values? So values are guidelines that give our life meaning and direction. So you can see how important they are in this evaluation stage. They're also important because they guide our self-care behavior, how we handle stress, and ultimately our happiness set point. Then thirdly, you review your options on how to react or how to respond. And then hopefully, if you do this correctly, you will cope effectively. So the key to coping is knowing that you have alternatives, knowing that you have a choice to cope effectively. So when you cope effectively, you naturally begin to make healthier choices. When you feel better, you want to continue to feel better. You might raise that set point that we talked about. You act in ways that support your really important, positive, and personal values. And all of this leads to resilience, thriving, and even flourishing. So when you cope effectively, that is how you strengthen your coping power and thrive. So now we just talked about the positive stress or the positive coping cycle. Now we're going to look at the negative coping cycle. So it's going to look pretty familiar. First we have that stress again, and then we have the evaluation stage. In the negative cycle, and it's called the cycle because we get stuck in a loop, what the difference is that we fail to evaluate. We don't stop. We don't have that pause. We just keep going, and the stress builds up and the tension builds up. And this is often because we have beliefs about what it means to stop. Think about what we feel when we take a rest or we don't push ourselves. We might think it's too much trouble to stop, it's too painful to pause and evaluate, or we're just used to doing it this way. So what happens is the tension has to go somewhere, and we find outlets or methods for temporarily relieving the stress, or methods for creating a sense of pleasure or numbing that remove the stressful feeling and belief. And then this can be the basis of addiction, substance abuse. I mean, look at the pictures here. We have people overeating, staying up all night on their phone, smoking, fighting with one another. There are a lot of types of dependencies that we can rely on when we have this tension. So each of these can become unhealthy coping mechanisms, especially if they're done over and over again and therefore becoming a habit. So we talked about those early warning signs. If we pushed through those and did not go through our evaluation stage, we are going to come across these later warning signs. So this happens when we fail to notice the early warning signs, we fail to follow our values and know our set point, we fail to implement that positive coping cycle, and therefore letting our built-up tension release come out all at once and become addictive habit, and now it results in more serious warning signs. So maybe you are in that spot that you've ignored those early warning symptoms or those early warning signs, because it can be easy to do if you have never been presented or challenged to look at them before. So how do you know whether you're using the unhealthy coping cycle? Well, one way to know is if you have a compulsive need for something, such as alcohol or drugs, and you can't control this habit that you've built. However, some people are either not even aware or they're in denial about a habit or addiction. And often the only way to increase awareness is when you can see actual signs of not coping well, like this list. So think of these things on the screen: irritability, crying a lot, feeling down often, changes in our habits. Think to yourself, how many of these have maybe you had in the past month? And how many do you think that one should have before it's time to get help? These are just things to think about. And it's possible that having just one warning sign is all that we need. We realize, okay, we need help. And consider that one's answer to this question says something about their set point. That's always what you return back to. So if you're used to a lower or higher set point, that can answer the question of how many of these should one have before getting help. Some of us can learn to put up with and tolerate with a lot of these symptoms and signs, but that's just not healthy. So coming up, we're going to do an exercise to help us raise our set points so we can act sooner when we see the early warning signs and we get prompt help when we see those later warning signs. So by now, it's pretty clear what those 3 steps to the positive coping cycle is. So your ability to evaluate and make the choice of how you will respond is influenced by 2 factors. There's 2 factors that we have control over: lifestyle and response style. So remember, lifestyle is how well you regularly and routinely take care of yourself. The second is your response style. This means your tendency to react or respond to the stressor in effective or ineffective ways. Having a healthy lifestyle like diet, exercise, and rest prepares and protects you when stress occurs. And choosing a healthy response style allows you to deal with the stress effectively after it occurs. How you choose to respond comes down to whether you evaluate or not, whether you skip that evaluation and pause, step, like ignoring the situation. A strong lifestyle and positive response style means more likely to evaluate. So now we're going to think about how we can take these steps and apply them to our life. And we're going to ask ourselves a few questions with a challenge coming up. So we really encourage you to take part in the exercise in the link below this webinar to set a plan or take what you've learned here and put it into practice. So when you ask yourself the questions on this exercise, think about the positive steps you want to take, the areas you might want to improve. How does your natural response style fit in, and do you have to change that? What kind of effective strategies can you use to address the lifestyle behavior that you choose? And what kinds of ineffective strategies have you had in place that now you need to let go? So the first thing you're going to think about is your stress. What area of your life has stress in it? Or what area in your life do you want to focus on right now? And then your response. What is it typically? What is it currently? And how can you respond better? Then you want to set a goal around that. So what goal, intention, or affirmation will work for you for change? Then think of one step, that first step that you can do to work towards that goal. And what's something that you can commit to? And then the last step, which we will go over next, is to infuse, whether it's infusing that goal, that affirmation, that first step, but infuse that into a time of relaxation. So what does that really mean? Well, we want to take your intention or your positive step and infuse it into breathing, or bringing it into your mind in a relaxed way. As a result of going through those questions, you should have at least one positive statement or affirmation. And this would be present tense, it's a positive thing, it's affirmative, it's an optimistic statement. It can be a goal, intention, or affirmation. And what you want to do during this time is either say that goal, say that intention, or say that affirmation. So for example, if you're trying to get healthy or you're trying to quit smoking, your goal can be, I will work with my doctor to get back on track. Your intention can be, if I find myself using cigarettes, I will call my friend and go for a walk. And then your affirmation is, I am strong and centered and know how to relax. So remember that positive statement and use it throughout our gentle breathing exercise that we're going to do. And just repeat that statement over and over again until it kind of fades into the background and becomes part of your attitude and part of who you are and what you think about throughout the day. It becomes your underlying belief, maybe even a value of yours that is healthy and whole. So starting now, I'm going to lead you through these, and I want you to think about your positive statement and say it silently in the background of your mind. So you're going to sit up straight, feet flat on the floor, and just imagine you're sitting so tall that a string is pulling from the base of your spine all the way through the top of your head. And then while you're here, you're going to breathe in. Inhale for 6 counts. And then exhale for 6 counts. And then inhale again. And exhale. And I want you to repeat that breathing until you feel more relaxed. So just keep inhaling and exhaling. Don't forget that positive affirmation or goal or intention as you breathe. And then one more round. Great. Kind of come back to reality and realize how that felt and how much of a positive impact that can make on your moment and that can make on your day. And you can take any time throughout the day to do that exercise. And I really encourage you to do so. So thank you so much for listening to this webinar. We really hope it made an impact on how you can look at stress and really grow from any stress instead of being knocked down. And if you have any questions about this webinar or any of our Healthy Directions wellness programs, please reach out to us at healthydirections@hne.com. Thank you so much and have a great day.